So, hey, Patrick, how are you doing? It's great to see you.
Good. It's good to see you too.
Yeah, and you're up in New York right now, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're up here in the Bronx. So,
Oh, you're in the Bronx? We're in
yeah.
the
Yeah.
Bronx.
In Riverdale, if you know New York City.
I do know New York City. So, you've got some decent Jewish delis near you, I suppose.
Jewish delis. Yeah. I don't eat meat, but I hear the pastrami sandwich is off the hook. So,
Okay, I mean, maybe there's vegetarian
no,
pastrami.
I'm not going to touch that. That's too provocative.
Okay. Well, I believe you've got some Filipino blood, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So
100%.
I guess they eat a lot of meat, but they have this wonderful dish, which I guess would work with tofu. What is it, like a adobo with a lot of
Yes.
vinegar, right?
Yes. Yes. But
Yeah.
yes, my whole family has mostly disowned me for my dietary choices. It's not doesn't play well in the Philippines, but so be it.
Well, but that I think those spices would work wonderfully on with vegetables and stuff.
Yes. Well, I eat seafood, and we do have a lot of seafood.
You
So
have a lot of seafood.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
So, all right. So, I'm looking at my questions over here. So, where did you grow up, actually?
So I'm a born and bred New Yorker. That's the short answer. But my background, I actually bounced around a lot. So I was born in the city. My family, like I said, is from the
Wait,
Philippines,
we're in the city because I am also. So,
Queens.
own Queens. Okay.
Yeah, Elmhurst. Yeah, one of the dozen places in the States where there's like a really thriving Filipino community. So we've got family around here. My parents came from the Philippines to Queens. I was born here. We actually moved back to the Philippines when I was very young. I think the idea was that we were just gonna be in the Philippines full stop, but the political situation was a little bit hot. So the family came back. I lived in Westchester for,
It's
well,
kind of
first
hot. It's kind of hot there now,
it's
actually.
hot there now. I mean, it's never super cool, but at the time it was the Marcos regime. It was yeah, it was a fiasco. So
Yeah.
so the family um came back first to Queens, ended up settling in Westchester, but then when I was a teenager, my dad's job actually bounced around a lot, bounced the family around a lot overseas. So we were in Indonesia for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I finished high school in Taiwan.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I came back after I came back for college. My family and including my younger siblings continued moving around. So they were in Singapore for about 10 years. So it was very funny when I was in college and early adulthood, even though I never lived in Singapore, going back home to see my family was going to Singapore, where I'd never really spent any time. So um, yeah, so kind of a circuitous background. But I've always managed to find my way back to New York, including, as you know, when you and I met, Karen and I and the family had recently moved to Philadelphia,
Right.
uh, with no anticipation of any further or forthcoming changes. But here we are back in New York again, just a couple
Uh-huh.
years later. So
So all right. So you obviously you speak English. You speak, uh, I guess, what Philippines has three languages, right? There's English, Tagalog, and then there's another.
well, English and Tagalog are the two main languages, and then there's about a million other regional dialects.
Okay.
Visayan is one of the big ones.
I mean,
My
there's
my
from
thing my
the mountains up north, I remember.
Yeah, yeah. My
Uh,
Tagalog is okay. That's already being kind of generous.
okay.
I can understand it well enough. My parents speak to me in Tagalog, but then I mostly have to respond in English.
And you
Um,
speak Chinese if you finished high school in Taiwan?
no, I am ashamed to say that I have basically zero Chinese because my dad's job took us in and out of the expat communities in these different places, and part of that also meant an international education. So I went to an English speaking school.
Well, look, I'm half Chinese and I don't speak any Chinese. I
All right.
barely even pronounce my name, so
Yeah.
there's no shame in that.
All right. Fair enough.
But
My Spanish is okay. So
oh,
that's
okay.
yeah, that's my main secondary language.
And were your parents, I guess your father wasn't a musician then, a businessman or
Yeah, he was in finance. And so he just ended up taking all these regional assignments.
I see. I see.
Yeah, yeah.
And what is so? I mean, all right. I'm wondering what your journey was to becoming a composer, or I mean, maybe your mother was a musician, or I mean, it's a very specific thing, a composer.
That's well put. It is a very specific thing. Um, there is virtually no musicianship in my family. In previous generations, I have an aunt who is a piano teacher. Like that's basically it. I mean, it's such a cliche, but it's a cliche for a good reason, right? That people say you don't choose music, music chooses you.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So truly, since since I was very young, I think music was just a language that came naturally to me. I mean, my parents like to tell the story that when I was 3 and in preschool, um, apparently I would show up to school and before the day could get started, I would run through like all the songs in my arsenal and like I would insist on like we would sing all these songs and so I'm sure like to the exasperation of my teachers, um, yeah, it was just kind of an organic a deep-seated thing that a deep-seated outlet, right? When I was a kid, and then going through like adolescence, my main instrument was guitar. Um, I did study classical guitar, but I also did like the whole punk rock thing and all of that. So like in middle and high school, playing in bands and stuff like that. But so I was always writing songs. And okay, so guitar was my primary instrument. I played a bunch of different instruments. I took piano lessons. I played different woodwind instruments in middle and high school band and jazz band. Um, the truth is, I never I was a poor instrumentalist. I never really advanced. In retrospect, because well, one, to be honest, I mean, there's a certain talent deficiency that I probably just have to own up to. But also, I never had patience for practicing
Mm,
because when I sat with the instrument, what I was naturally compelled to do was to just make stuff up,
mm,
you know. And when you're in like a regimented training routine, whether it's private lessons or Suzuki or you're in the school band or whatever, like there's the thing you're supposed to do, and I guess I felt like I was like doing this delinquent thing, right? Like I should be practicing, but instead of practicing, I'm making something up. But that's just sort of how my practice evolved naturally.
mm,
And then when I got to college, so I was at the classical guitar studio in college, and I wasn't even sure going to college that I was going to go fully into music. I actually went to college thinking I might be a theater major because I did some acting in high school.
all right. But this,
Um,
so you were went to college ostensibly to in a performance program on guitar.
well, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, so I went to Vassar College. I went to a liberal arts school
Okay,
where
yeah,
basically you
great
can
school.
do whatever. So it's not. I mean, it's not a conservatory, right? And so I was deeply ensconced in the music department with one foot in the theater department, one foot in English. I was in sociology. Like I was just doing a lot of different things. When I finally decided, okay, music is the thing, um, the way that it worked at my school was you needed to choose a focus, and the focus was either um, performance, theory, composition, or history. Um, and I told my guitar teacher that my plan was to concentrate in theory, and he kind of laughed at me. He's also a composer, and he said, if you're gonna spend all that time learning all that theory, the least you can do is at least write us some bad music.
Yeah.
um, which is sort of a double-edged thing for a teacher to say to a student. But I remember that so clearly because the light bulb that went off for me at that moment was, oh, this thing that I've just naturally been doing
Mm.
literally since childhood, instinctively, that I thought was sort of me goofing off. Actually, this can be codified as a vocation, right? Like I'm here, I'm making up music because making up music is what I've always done. And here is an authority figure, the guy that's telling me to practice and I'm not practicing. But what he's actually telling me is that thing that you're always doing, you should be doing that. And
Uh,
like don't do this other thing because you think you're supposed to. The thing that you are doing is totally legit. And so that's how I guess I started identifying as a composer with a capital C.
yeah. Wow, what a boy, it's just amazing that he had the, I don't know, the consideration to look at who you were and what you were doing and to listen to you. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, this is what a really good teacher should do, but this is not what some teachers or many teachers will take the time to do. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
and with one brief conversation and one question even, uh, your whole life goes in this
Yes.
other direction.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you still in touch?
No, sadly, I mean, occasionally we're not closely in touch. I actually did keep in closer touch with the teachers who, ostensibly were my actual composition teachers.
Mhm.
Although what's funny is that my guitar lessons, but basically from that point on, I would go to my guitar lessons and more often than not, the instrument wouldn't even come out of the case because I would show them what I was writing. And we would just work on that together.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So, well, let me ask you well, two questions. What are you working on now? And because I mean, I guess it's still a little, you're probably starting on the commission, and do you have a favorite piece that, maybe it's a ridiculous question. Do you have a favorite piece that you've written? For instance, that
It's funny. It's
I'll
not.
put a link to it so people.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so it's funny. It's not a ridiculous question. I actually just had this conversation a couple of weeks ago because I was in the Bay Area for a performance and a recording session of a piece of mine that's called Winter Light. It's named after the Bergman film, and it's well, okay. I'm going to say this: it's a piano quartet, but
That really sounds like a Bergman film, by the way, I have to say.
yes.
Yes.
So it's a piano quartet. However, with apologies to you and all of my other viola playing friends, it is a piano quartet for two violins, cello, and piano,
Oh,
because because it was commissioned to go on a program alongside the Korngold Suite for piano
is that with
left hand.
just left hand, right?
Left hand. Yeah, exactly.
So did
And
you
I
also write just for the left hand, the piano?
No, so I wrote for both hands. But that was the ensemble that was together for this program. So they asked for that as I'm going to digress now, but I suspect that Korngold's decision was based on basically since the piano is going to be so concentrated in the tenor and baritone register
Hmm.
that he wanted to even out the sonic profile with a second violin rather than viola. I don't know. I surmise, but anyway. Um,
Or it might have just been, who he had available or something.
Also possible, yeah.
Yeah, or he was
Um,
writing for a violinist who was married to another violinist,
yes, right. Who knows how these
made
things
money
go?
for a piano quartet.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Um, but anyway, to your question, so I was out in the Bay Area for this performance. I was reconnecting with some friends and colleagues, and somebody was asking me, well, somebody was saying, oh yeah, I'm really glad that I'm excited to hear this piece, and I said, yeah, I'm excited to hear it too because I realized that composition is not like parenthood, and in parenthood you you don't have a favorite child. I sometimes have a least favorite child, but you don't have a favorite child. But as a composer, I find inevitably there are certain pieces that I don't know that I don't want to call them my favorites, but somehow I feel more invested in them,
Of course.
and that's one of those pieces. So yeah, so it's a piano quartet, second violin, sans viola.
Is there a link online that I can,
Oh yeah, thank you. I'll send you something
okay, great.
after we're through here. So there's that piece. There's also a piano trio that I wrote during the pandemic that I'm quite fond of. So it's primarily chamber music actually.
Hmm.
You know, having done other, you know, dabbled in various mediums. I've done a fair amount of vocal music. I used to write a lot of choral music once upon a time.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's really my chamber music where I feel like I suppose I've mostly accomplished what I've set out to do, you know, in terms of expressing something.
I mean, the chamber ensemble is it's just so. I was speaking to a friend of mine, Greg Sandow, and it's so nimble
Yeah.
versus you write something for orchestra or for God forbid an opera, and you're really lucky to get to ever hear that.
Mm.
Not only in your lifetime, it's lucky ever to be put on. Whereas,
Yeah.
you write a piano quartet, and of course, it's still always hard to get music performed, but you can get four people together
Right.
to,
Right.
to perform something like that, and maybe get them together again. It's not these massed forces, an army of musicians there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and it's just in terms of nimble, they can. This is a whole other question. Greg and I have been talking about a lot, but just they, there's discussion about classical music and being in crisis,
Mm.
and I think you definitely feel that when you look at orchestras, and then orchestras fighting with their administrations and donations and opera companies, and to stage any opera, and forget the Met with 60 extras and horses and elephants, but just put on any opera and stages,
Wow.
the cost is tremendous.
Yeah.
Whereas a string quartet can play in you know they could just decide, well, we'll play in a coffee shop or something
Right.
like that.
Right. Right.
And I look at our audiences in Newburyport, and many of the concerts recently were selling out most of the concerts.
Mm.
Um, and but you don't have to have 800 people.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and people like to hear this. You're near the musicians,
Yes.
and you can talk to the musicians, and it's, I don't know. I feel chamber music doesn't feel to me in crisis in that
No.
way.
No.
And
No.
there's more quartets today than when I was in school, by an order of magnitude
Oh
or
yes.
more. I mean,
Yes.
I couldn't even start to name all the quartets
Right.
being today.
Right.
Um,
Well, what's also exciting in the realm of chamber music is I think you find more and more, and especially with in the arena of contemporary music, there are a lot of ensembles that are forming that you sort of get the sense that like these were the 4 or 5 best friends out of conservatory and they decided that they wanted to make music together.
mhm.
But it's not two violins, viola, and cello.
Right, sure.
And so you've got a lot of ensembles now that have these unorthodox instrumentations that are, I presume, what's happening is they get together, they want to make music, they say, hey, let's do a thing. They realize, well, there's not really a tradition for us to lean on, so we have to invent it ourselves, right? And that's something that, broadly speaking, the arena of chamber music empowers creatives to do, right? Is to
Mhm.
create a tradition. I think like some of my favorite ensembles on the scene right now, like there's an ensemble called Tak Ensemble, TAK, that I think they're just one of this supreme chamber ensembles, and their instrumentation they've evolved somewhat, but their instrumentation is soprano, violin, clarinet, percussion, and I think they have a fifth member now, but but it's like, okay, we're just gonna like commission the entirety of our repertoire,
Hmm.
and and here it is, right? Like this whole catalog of pieces now exists. Um, Load Bang is another ensemble that, I mean, what are they? It's like voice, bass, clarinet, trombone, and tuba or something like that. I mean,
Okay.
forget exactly what their instrumentation is, but it's like it's totally loony, but they approach what they're doing with such commitment and such conviction and such advocacy. And like 10, 15 years later, they've been around for a while now. It's like there's this whole repertoire that just didn't exist.
Right. Well,
Um,
there's another one. Eighth Blackbird comes to
it's
mind.
Blackbird, yeah.
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 So, and there are also these, I think probably almost every city now might have a small conductorless chamber orchestra.
Right, right.
Right. I mean, certainly Boston does, Philly does. Uh, and these groups again are more nimble.
Yeah,
They've got young people who are interested in all kinds of music
yeah,
also, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I mean, the interesting thing is every summer I'd say that the commissioned work we have is is really it's a focal point of attention and excitement and enthusiasm.
yeah,
People really
yeah,
looking forward to the new piece.
yeah, yeah,
And these are even sometimes there are even people who are like it's like, oh yeah, I don't like 20th century music, they might say that. Uh, and then they'll also say in the same sentence, wow, I really love that new piece
yeah,
this year.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
right.
um, so, well, all right. So tell us about the commission for this year. So I should tell people. So we've commissioned a work for string quartet and theremin, and I just spoke to Elizabeth, our theremin player, a couple days ago, and it is based on 12 iconic local birds, with various bird calls, right?
Mhm.
And we have 12 poems written by Alfred Nicole, short poems, and 12 paintings by Jane Niebling. We don't have all the paintings yet. I think she's got still 4 or 5 left. Um, and you're writing these 12 little microludes, and
Yes,
we can talk about Kurtog also,
yes.
Kurtog connection. Um, and yeah, so I mean, what do you think? Have you written for the theremin before? What do you think of, are you a birder? How's the piece? Have you worked on it all? How is it turning out, or how do you think it might turn out? Or
Yeah, it's coming along. Look at this. I will show you. I have evidence that it is all. I'm literally sitting here at my writing desk,
all right,
and
that's very comforting for me.
yeah, it's coming. Yeah, I'm really excited about the piece. I've never written for theremin. Um,
I mean, most
I
probably haven't, I suppose.
yeah, I have dabbled a fair amount in electronics. Working with like live processing and other things. But so in a way, it's funny because when you say just electronics from 30,000 feet, an electronic instrument, theremin, what even is that? Oh, it's this thing that you play without touching it. It sounds so futuristic, but in a way, for me, the exercise of writing for the theremin, having done a fair amount of things where like I've like developed a synthesizer or whatever, like worked with signers, in a way writing for the theremin has been this kind of monastic exercise of like, okay, we're living in the sound world, but we're getting back to basics
Mhm.
because it's not an electronic medium that actually like where you can sort of go nuts with all the different, like there's a kind of purity to the
Yeah,
instrument.
because it's a pure melodic instrument.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? There
um,
aren't sound effects of like, echoes and
yeah,
mixes.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
one could do
Yeah,
that, but that would be extra there.
right. And so because I find that oftentimes folks writing in an electronic medium or dabbling with technology. And you know, admittedly, I've probably been guilty of this myself, you know, from time to time. There's almost a certain like you get into your head a little bit, and there's a certain degree of like, can you top this? Like what is the most inventive thing that I can come up with, since I have like eternity at my hands, you know? I mean, it's not like a piano where, okay, you've got 88 keys and like that's what you've got. When you're making music with a computer, it's like, oh, well, if I've got the 64 crayons, I better use the 64 crayons, right? Um, but writing with the theremin, it's been almost like a cleansing process, because you can't do that, right? It's like, okay, you've got the 8 crayon box, but really all you need is the 8 crayons, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and combining the theremin with string quartet has been super fun too, because in a way, there are so many similarities, right? There's, you know, I mean, it's 5 melodic instruments, but at the same time, it takes that paradigm and sort of inverts it, because actually with a string quartet, you can come up like there's a much wider palette of colors and textures than I think a lot of people, you know, like casual listeners might have, you know, in their ear already.
Mm.
So that juxtaposition has been a lot of fun. Um, I've really been enjoying the sort of multifaceted nature of this project, given that, well, let me back up and say, you know, one of the most, I think, fulfilling things about the craft of composition, and I imagine the same is true of like, you know, playing an instrument, or if you were a poet, or like whatever your practice is, it's it's a means of interfacing with the world we live in, and it's also it's an outlet for interrogating whatever you want, you know, like to I don't know, to try to speak a little bit less abstractly, like to take form, right? Like if you're dealing with musical form, there are these traditional forms, you know, sonata form, fugue, etc. Um, but you know, one thing that's interesting to me is how how does one arrive at a musical form that feels au courant? You know, it feels like very much expressing something of the zeitgeist of our time. And it might be that you arrive at a form by interrogating a modern phenomenon. It could be, you know, the internet. Like, what is the musical form of the internet? What is the musical form of of football? What, you know, um, uh, uh, one of my dear friends in the field of composition, whom I admire very much, Libby Larson, has a great piece for solo clarinet that I forget the title of it, but she said that she derived the form of it from interstate driving, you know, and she said when she was a kid, interstate driving was a very different thing than it is now. Um, and and so composition was just like a form of interrogating that. So with that said, you know, this exercise of writing this piece that is related to birds, but also interacting with poetry. And then there's this visual arts component to it, like all of these things intersecting
Mhm.
in almost like a Blakean way, right? It's like, okay, we're constructing this whole universe, and um, yeah, I dig it. It's just been super fun to take and to be writing these 12, like you say, microludes, you know, to be expressing very succinctly a certain atmosphere or a certain idea.
And microludes being, I should say, right, each bird is going to be very short. I mean,
Yeah,
could be 30 seconds even.
yeah. I mean, so my movements, I'll tell you, they're ranging from like 70 seconds to 15 seconds, you know,
Uh-huh.
each of these microludes. Um, but well, okay, let me say this. I realize I'm like vomiting a lot of abstraction here, um, but one of the central ideas that I keep coming back to in my work um, is how I think everything is referential. You know, I mean, it's I mean, it's sort of the foundation of postmodern thought, I guess, right? That like the absolute truth of any given thing is not just contained in itself, but it's informed by everything else, right? Like you listen to a Beethoven symphony today, and the truth of that Beethoven symphony is different from what it was at the time that Beethoven wrote it, because when we listen to Beethoven 9 now, we can't divorce ourselves from the fact that Beethoven 9 is the piece that Bernstein conducted when the Berlin Wall fell. All right. So like that is part of the truth of that piece. Um, when you read a Shakespeare play, there's a whole tradition that didn't exist, but today that's part of the truth of that play. So each of these like 15, 20, 60-second pieces, they're informed not just by like, okay, I'm sitting here with pencil and paper and I'm going to write a thing, but okay, the immediate prompt is, okay, there's a bird, okay, and the bird exists in the world and has characteristics. It has a song and it has a place where it lives and it has behaviors, which have also prompted a poet to create something. So now I've got another point of reference that I can bring in. And so, you know, a lot of these, you know, a handful of these microludes, I've always started with the bird, but then reading the poem and thinking, okay, like what is the like what is the third leg of the stool that what I'm creating can provide here? Yeah, so that kind of um the manifesting of those constellations has been a lot of fun to sink my teeth into.
Well, the idea that there's a dialogue between the music and obviously the subject matter, which
Yeah.
is kind of the bird, right? And also the poems and maybe the music and of course everything else going on in your life, in fact.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, let me ask this. I mean, this is going back to another thing, but does your Filipino background, what does that have any does that have had any kind of influence or impact on the music you write, or music that you might have heard in, I don't know, in Indonesia or in the East? I mean, having spent a lot of time in what, you know, what we would call it from in Philadelphia, the Far East.
Right. Yeah. Not consciously in the way that, I mean, I haven't like in a studious manner, you know, like taken, you know, like examined a certain musical tradition and then thought how to incorporate it. But on the other hand, I mean, it's kind of like if, you know, if you ask the musicians who play a concert, well, how long did it take you to prepare to play this concert? There's always two answers to that question, right? The first answer is, well, we started rehearsing 3 weeks ago. But the second answer is, my whole life I've been preparing for this concert, right? Because every performance represents like the summation of who you are from the beginning of your practice to that point, right? So I think inevitably, yes, because like everything that one is exposed to becomes part of your lexicon. More specifically, I will say that Filipino music, not so much. When I lived in Indonesia, I was exposed to gamelan music for the first time. And you know, I mean, if for people who know gamelan music, you know, I mean, it's a sound world that just transports you. Like if it's not, you know, the music that you grew up with, or, you know, the discovery of gamelan music is one of those like sea parting moments, right? It's like, oh my God, what is this? Now, so I first encountered gamelan music. I was like 11 or 12 years old, and it was just this thing, right? It was this cultural phenomenon in this place that I lived. And it was only like years later where I sort of reverse engineered how this music has infiltrated my creative consciousness.
Mm.
when I realized that a lot of the composers whom I had been studying in the Western canon as part of my, academic training also had this kind of organic attraction to gamelan music, Debussy and Ravel and my favorite composer, Messiaen, um, incorporated not like in a quotidian way, right? But upon experiencing that sound world, it influences how you think about color, how you think about rhythm, how you think about harmony. Um, so so in a way, it was like I had that seed planted when I was young, filed it away.
Mm.
Years later, I'm, working with my teachers and analyzing music of Messiaen and then realizing, oh, part of what's animating this is this thing that I just like I hear in my dreams sometimes for the last 20 years. So yeah, no, it's the question of influence is interesting, right? Because there's the conscious way that we incorporate things, and then there's just the way that things become how we naturally express ourselves, consciously or not.
Yeah. Interesting. I was just thinking of this recently because I mean, as someone who's written some music, not a bunch, 7 or 8 pieces, and they're all basically klezmer based.
Ah,
Um, it's not something I set out to do. It just that sound world comes naturally. But right now I'm writing a piece for Newburyport's 25th anniversary, which will be 2026.
wow.
And it's a Celtic story it's based on, and I'm using some Celtic tunes. And it's hard because, what do I know from Celtic music? I'm doing a lot of research, but it's not coming naturally.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's still fun. I mean, it's a pretty interesting project, doing a deep dive in this other stuff, but it's very different from, I didn't study klezmer music. I heard it when I was a kid. I didn't hear tons, but it was just,
yeah,
it was around.
yeah,
And it just, yeah, I never would have thought that I was deeply influenced by that until I started writing music, and that just came very naturally to me.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah. So do you listen to any non-classical music, or what are you listening to now? I'd like to put a link to something that a piece that you think people should hear. It could even be pop music or whatever.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I am I am I'm a music addict, I will say. I mean, like I listen with with indiscriminate catholicity to everything I can. Part of that has to do just with my day job. I run programming for the New York Philharmonic, so a lot of what I do just as a matter of course from day to day is listening to what composers and instrumentalists are up to. One thing that I'm very excited about right now is the conductor Dalia Stasevska um, has started. Well, it's an interesting project. Um, she is releasing an album, sort of one piece at a time.
Wait, tell me her name again.
Yeah, Dalia, Dalia Stasevska, Stasevska. She is Finnish of, I believe, Ukrainian extraction.
Hmm.
Um, very fine conductor, wonderful musician. Um, but so she has a project right now. I believe it's called Dahlia's Mixtape. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that they've released 2 pieces so far. But so basically, she's releasing one piece at a time, this album of orchestral work. all by living composers, but with each release, the recording is accompanied by a conversation between herself, a music journalist, and the composer. And the whole idea is she's trying to reveal how the symphony orchestra, which is a medium that has existed for generations, how it can feel very much a singularly contemporary medium. And so actually the first piece that they release is a piece by the composer Anna Meredith, who is primarily, well, I don't know if it's fair to say primarily, but I think her chief notoriety is as an electronic musician, and she made an electronic album, and the first orchestral work on Dahlia's project is Anna Meredith's orchestral arrangement of an electronic piece. And it's just it's super cool. I don't know. So I appreciate things like that just sort of like open one's ears. Yeah, I don't know what else. The Black Keys have a new album that I'm really excited about. That's sort of garage band that made it big. I've been into them for a long time.
What's the name of that album?
It's called Ohio Players. Yeah, and it's super cool. That's been in heavy rotation for me. It just came out last week. I'm into that one a lot. The pianist Vijay Iyer has a record that I like a lot. It's a piano trio album, so it's called Compassion. But I think is super wonderful. So I've been listening to that.
Wait, let me just ask you. So
Yeah.
you said your official day job is I had known this, but so it's program director for the New York.
Yeah, so I'm the head of artistic planning, which basically means I get to operate the jukebox at the New York Phil.
So how does that work in terms of like an orchestra? I mean, in programming in general, it needs to have. I mean, it's for me, for Newburyport, I'm choosing pieces that obviously that I like, but also that I think will go together in interesting ways and stretch the audience in different ways. Some which might be more familiar, some which might be maybe cutting edge in other ways. Orchestra, it's difficult because you've got a whole season to put together. There are practicalities and soloists and concertos, and soloists might only have certain pieces, right? They'll come in and say, well, I could do A, B, or C.
Yeah.
How does an artistic programmer, I mean, and also you've got the conductor, I'm sure, who wants to put their personal stamp.
Yeah.
And should, right? So how does that work, and how do you put together a season of orchestral music that actually has a personality and a vision without just being anodyne and just and because there's also risks. I mean, I guess LA Philharmonic, the SFPECA is really pushing kind of contemporary music and has made a success out of that. But you can't just do Beethoven 5 and Mahler 1 and Brahms 4 over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But you need some of that. I mean, how does this work? I've never spoken to the.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is in the question, really. I mean, right? Like it's all of those things, and it's an exercise in balancing all of those things.
But one more thing, just how do you do it so that it doesn't wind up looking like it's just designed by committee? I guess that's the danger.
Yeah. So that's my job, right? That's what I'm entrusted with, is I sort of have the final say so on what's going to go to print. And so, yes, I mean, you do have the music director doing whatever, 10, 12, 15, however many programs of a season. You've got these guest conductors, and And it does have to fall on, you know, one person who's developing the field of vision who can say, okay, this conductor is going to be with us in this week, and we're going to do this program, and the next week we're going to have this conductor, you know, totally different conductor, totally different soloist. It's none of this conductor's business what this conductor is doing, but somebody's got to sort of make sure everything is in its right place, right? And so, yeah, so look, I mean, there's a lot of very pedestrian elements to it that just need managing, right? Like here's a soloist whom we're prioritizing. That soloist has no relationship with this conductor, so we're going to find a different week, but they're not available in this week. So there's all of those things. But I guess the more interesting part of the answer to your question, so you know, it's interesting, and I say this gingerly because I don't mean to sort of unduly inflate the the importance of what I do, but I will say that I'm I'm thankful that I come to this position with a creative background, because I think that the skill set that one has as a creative artist, be it as a composer, a performer, you know, whatever it is, that skill set I think is essential to the task of artistic planning, because there's a certain element to it where it's like, okay, I know the tools of the trade, right? As a composer, I know the theory, I know how to write for this instrument. You know, like I know all of those things that you're taught. In planning an orchestra season, I know the tools of the trade. I know how to structure a rehearsal schedule. I know that you can't do Bruckner 8 on the first half, Bruckner 9 on the second half. Like, you know, like I know those things. I know how to negotiate a fee. Like, you know, like, so like all of the things that are in the toolbox. What you cannot be taught as a composer is taste, right? Because like all of us who are in the arts, we're all in the business of truth telling, right? And when you write a piece, or when as a performer you fashion an interpretation of a piece, what you're doing is you're finding truth. And you can't, like, that's not something that can be empirically articulated, right? Like the to find the truth of a Beethoven string quartet, if that could be captured in prose, then like it would just be done. But it cannot be. The truth of a piece of music is captured in the interpretation of the performance. The truth of a piece of music as a composer, you can be writing a piece and do all the things right, and then get to the end of the piece and just know innately, okay, I know that I got to the double bar. I've been asked for a 15-minute piece. It's 15 minutes long, and I'm done, but it's not right.
Hmm.
Something else needs to, I need to revise.
I think you just described about three quarters of everything Hindemith wrote. And when Hindemith's good, I really like Hindemith, but there's a lot.
Yes.
Sorry, but there's a lot
No,
of.
I think you're not wrong. Yeah, that's true.
Beautifully written, beautifully crafted. He does everything right. You look at it, it's really interesting.
Right.
And you listen to it and you're like, meh.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. That's it's that phenomenon. Um, and the thing about, like, when you write a piece of music, you could, you know, for example, like you could be writing a 15-minute piece for, I don't know, piano and percussion. Okay. And you work out all the ideas, you do all the things that you do as a composer, and you get to the end of the piece and you realize what the ending needs is, I don't know, whatever is a crotale, we need crotales at the end. Then you think, okay, I
What-
haven't used
what's it
crotale.
called?
Like they're like struck bells, they're pitched struck bells.
Okay.
When you get to the end of the piece, you say, okay, that this moment in the piece, that's what it needs. But I haven't used crotales for the whole piece. Now, is that okay that I'm going to have this like big aha moment? Or do I need for that sound to have been established as part of the vocabulary of this? Like you have these questions, right? And it might be that you get to the end of the piece and you say, it's not honest. What I've done here so far is not honest.
Hmm.
And in order to get to the truth of this piece, it might be that you need to erase half of what you've done and reverse engineer, and like you have to be willing to do that. And the reason I've gone off on this diatribe is to say that the exercise of planning an orchestra season or a festival, like program planning, it's somewhat the same exercise because, like, yes, you can know how to do all the things in terms of like engaging a conductor, figuring out a soloist, but there's also a certain element of like when you've shaped a program, you just sort of have to know that it's right. And when you've shaped a season,
Yeah.
there's a truth to the season, and when you've sketched out the whole season, if it's not totally honest. In my opinion, right? And that to me is why I feel like I say I'm thankful that I've come into my position with the background that I have, because I feel like I feel like that perspective is critical, and it's not something that you can learn. I mean, it's not something that you can be taught. It's something that I think you learn by doing it, and unfortunately, the way that you learn is by putting on a program and then being excited about the program and sitting in the concert and get to the end of the concert and thinking, ugh, wrong choice.
That's a bad feeling.
Yeah.
It's interesting you choose this word honest. I would agree with that, but it introduces an almost moral aspect to this concept, which I hadn't really thought of before, but in some ways, yeah. Huh. So, well, look, we've spoken a long time here. So, Patrick, thank you so much. This is terrific.
Thank you, David.
Really looking forward to your piece this summer.
Yeah, I'm excited. You'll have it soon.
Okay, well, thank
We're
you.
getting
Yeah,
there.
what did we say? May 1st
Yes.
was our target date.
Yes.
So, all right, well, thank you, and see you this summer.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thank you.